I just think it's such an important talk, it was such a good talk, and it's so critical now. Because when you look at what's going on in Detroit now, and what's holding back the resistance to the most devastating crisis that any of us have ever seen, and probably that any city has ever suffered, pretty comparable to New Orleans after Katrina. What holds it back? It goes, I think, to the root of what Abayomi's talked about, is what's the state? The movement in this country, in this city, wants to define the problem as Mayor Bean, or Bob, or before that it was Kilpatrick, or, or Worry. But the fact of the matter is, those are the figureheads. That we can replace a figurehead, but the state is still in power. And that's the essence of capitalism. People believe a lot that this is a democracy, but what Marx and Lenin explained is that this is the dictatorship of the rich. It's a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And if there's anyone who does it, and elections are the greatest facade for them, because people believe, you get a chance to elect your own oppressor. And it looks but the fact is, when there's a crisis, that's when the state comes into action. And as Abayomi pointed out, we see it all the time. And if there's any question about it domestically, look internationally. Chile elected a socialist, the CIA overthrew him.
Yeah.
Guatemala elected even a progressive nationalist in the 50s that took over the United Fruit Company. They rushed the troops in to overthrow them. They've tried to, Iran, Mossadegh was elected. And it's all this crap about Iran, but in the 50s they elected someone who took over the oil company. The CIA, and the head of the CIA was a direct employee of the oil company, overthrew them. They don't care about elections. Elections, they're a convenience for them until the people rise up. And when Mayor Young, especially in his early years, tried to institute some progressive changes, the FBI spent $40 million to try to get him and to weaken him and they did, and they boycotted Detroit was the other thing they did. From 1979 to 1992, not one job was placed in Detroit. Not one job. They destroyed the economy to retaliate for the election of a moderate black mayor, and that's what he was. He was a moderate. He wasn't even a socialist. And I think it's so important to be clear on what we're fighting, is that we're not fighting an individual, we're fighting a system. Yes. And who's calling like Cheryl said, the budget in Detroit? It's the banks, man. And if you don't talk about it, you can't fight it. What I think about a lot is in Greece, what's happening in Greece is the same as Detroit. The banks are ordering the government to restructure and refinance because the government goes in default, so they order them to refinance. So what? So the banks can get more of their money by imposing more cutbacks on the workers. But in Greece, when the workers saw it, they went on a general strike, and they're still going on strike.
Admirable.
What's the difference in Greece and here? Because the unions are led by communists and socialists who understand the state. They understand what they're fighting about. Our meeting may be small, but we have to get this consciousness in there, because once we do, it's amazing what one or two revolutionaries can change. In the early 90s, Cheryl talked about it. Cheryl was in AFSCME, and Diane Bukowski was a member of our party then and was in AFSCME. And during that period, they had big cutbacks. But what our comrades did? They put the onus on the banks and called for a moratorium on debt. And there was a march of hundreds of city workers through the financial district chanting, "Take it from the banks, not the city workers." And it scared the hell out of them. They rescinded 800 layoffs. They rescinded the privatization. We formed a coalition that pretty much put a halt on privatization because they knew what we were fighting. I just think it's so important in this period to take the time to review our politics, and I think Abayomi did such a great job, because clarity in terms of political consciousness will lead to struggle. People are ready to fight, but they got to know what they're fighting. Just 2 minutes out of it. Think about it. The banks have destroyed destroyed the property values of everyone's home in Detroit. Why is the city broke? Because they did, and they did it through a deliberate, racist, predatory lending. 85% of the loans in Detroit were subprime. Senior, I mean, I know I represent senior citizens on fixed incomes who got arm loans, ridiculous loans that they knew they couldn't pay. And so first of all, and now, after destroying the tax base, they're saying there's no money in the budget to pay us off, so the workers got to give it up. Not only that, Joanne Watson calls for a $10 billion Marshall Plan, and everybody thinks, oh, that's ridiculous, what a stupid, and that's how it's treated. It's treated with and yet, there's a $10 billion Marshall Plan going on in Detroit. It's going to the banks. Every time there's a foreclosure in Detroit, the banks are paid off. We need to say this to people. In other words, if you got a home with a mortgage of $100,000 and almost every home is backed by FHA, Freddie Mac, or Fannie Mae, the government pays the banks. When that home goes into foreclosure, the banks get the $100,000 and they dump it for $2,000 and we pay the other $98,000. So there's a Marshall Plan going on for it right now. It's just it's going to the banks.
In reverse.
We need to say that. It's not her plan isn't. There's already a Marshall Plan in Detroit. It's a Marshall Plan for the banks. It's the same people that have destroyed it and not for the workers. We need to bring this stuff out, and it may be tough for a minute, but it ain't going to be that tough. This meeting Tuesday is important. We have flyers that lay out the money, and it's going to call for meeting. We need to be there at 4 or 5:30 at Majestic and bring them out. We need to hammer at it, and it may be slow for a minute or two, but there's nowhere else for it to go. If you don't fight capitalism, you can't fight it. And as Abayumi said, there's no, just one other thing on stress, because it's so important. Stress was a killer unit, but it also was a political unit. It was directed against political organizations. Our own party in the early 70s, we were the grouping us that formed Workers' World were all about 20, 21 years old. It was mostly white youth initially that came from the student movement. In the early 70s, we formed an alliance with a group of black veterans that were very revolutionary and were moving closer to us. And of course, at that time, their biggest fear was black and white working together on a revolutionary basis. You know, these black vets were hit by stress every single night. Were arrested. We were picking the police station every single night, and it was stress going after them. So stress was a political hit squad. It was a political hit squad. It was directed against the rising liberation struggle in Detroit, and it was directed against those who were organizing to fight back. It was a political hit squad. That's what the state is. And workers as a whole, while the police and the relationship of the oppressed to the police is obviously feel it every day, but white workers are going to learn it too. During the newspaper strike, which was mostly white workers, but there were battles. And it was the Sterling Heights police that were vamping on people every day. And these workers learned an important lesson. And many of them now became allies of the struggle of the oppressed against police brutality, of people on wealth, because they've learned it. So I don't mean to go on and on. I just think this is such an important meeting. And unfortunately, we built it on a little bit on a bad night, and I blame myself for that. But it was I thought Abayumi's talk should be published. It was it went to the core of it. And looking at Lenin, looking at the lessons of Marx and Lenin on the state, they cry at you today. And that's why we need to bring the perspective, to put the focus on where the real class enemy is in the day-to-day struggle, and really to build a struggle that can achieve liberation by overthrowing the capitalist state and by building a worker state. Where the police for the worker state will be putting the capitalists in jail, will be putting the bankers in jail. That's what the dictatorship of the proletariat. Until we can have a society which gets rid of the scum and the parasites, the capitalist class, that rid us all, and then we can build a world, a communist world, where we all live in peace and unity together, where we won't even need a state.